Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live Q&A with Erik Martin. Basically, before we get started, I would like to ask everyone who's in attendance to basically start entering in your questions now in the question and answer module. That way we can have the questions ready for Erik this afternoon. Aside from that, just feel free to ask whatever you want, and we'll try to get to all the questions, of course, as we have them asked. But beyond that, we'll basically turn it over to Erik now so that he can give us a brief introduction as to, who he is, where he works, and some of his experience and how he got into the industry and everything like that. So sit back, enjoy, and Erik, I'm going to basically start sharing the screen with you, so look out for that.
Sounds good. Cool. So I think everyone can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Let me see. Is there a way I could just make it just on Photoshop?
I don't think that functionality exists with this particular program, but you can just maximize Photoshop if you like, and we can look at it from there. So, perfect.
Cool. So hey everyone, my name is Erik Martin, and I've been working in the industry for about 4 years now. I originally went to Art Center College of Design. My first job out of school was working at Imagineering. So from there, I started just pretty much jumping around the industry because, like we pretty much typically just jump from one project to another's. And I eventually went to Nickelodeon. And I worked on a couple pilots for them. Then from Nickelodeon, I went to man, it's really funny when you have to start reflecting on your own career because I worked at Technicolor, Nickelodeon, Hasbro Animation, Jim Henson. That's the studio I was formerly at, but now I'm going back to Disney Interactive to be an art lead for hopefully an upcoming video game title. But a lot of the projects I worked on are always in the development stage. So that always means like we just have to, show investors, get them all excited. Everyone starts pulling in the money, and then like eventually the production starts rolling. In the case of Nickelodeon, we had pretty much everything lined up, but we just needed the executives from Nickelodeon to give us the go-ahead, and we did the whole animated show, or we got the pilot rather, all animated. Everything was awesome, but unfortunately, it just the timing didn't work well for them in terms of the schedule for their network. So, it's just anything like that can always just like pull a plug on a project. So, it's kind of disheartening. But yeah. So I've been around, and I think the comic that I worked on was with Kazu Kibishi. I was one of his background painters for Amulet, just Volume 1. And yeah. So, does anyone have like any specific questions or anything?
Actually, we have quite a few questions. I'm just going to go down
awesome.
the list. The first few are from Lily G. So the first question is, where was your first concept artist job, and how did you get into the industry? So I guess you kind of touched on it already in a way, but if you can clarify a bit more.
Yeah. So my first one was actually working at Imagineering. We were working at this R&D program at Disney. And it was really cool because we didn't really have an art director, and I actually never graduated from Art Center. I kind of went halfway through school, and then I got offered this job, and I said, well, might as well start paying off my student loans as quickly as possible. So I jumped onto that one, and that one was primarily just a friend hooking me up. And they were just saying like, hey, they're looking for people now, and I'm like, cool. So I showed them my portfolio, they liked what they saw, and then they brought us on. And it was a cool opportunity because we didn't really have an art director, so we all kind of just like art directed ourselves, and we were able to paint and draw whatever we thought was cool at the time. So it worked out really well. Unfortunately, that was right around the time when the economy crashed, and Disney just put a hiring freeze on everything, and they were like just shutting down every single project they can possibly get their hands on. And unfortunately, we went from like having like a $6 million budget to having a $3 million budget, and then finally they just said like, no, we're just not going to do this right now. We're going to save it for the future. And so that project was put on hold, unfortunately. But yeah, that was my first gig out of school. And typically you find that a lot of times you're going to get your work through your friends primarily. And because sometimes it doesn't even matter who you know that are like really higher up. And usually it's always your friends that are going to like let you know like, hey, this studio's hiring, this one's looking for people. And I typically find it's pure luck, honestly. It's luck and driven. And the only reason why I say that is because I'm just going to quickly go off course to this other story when how I got my Nickelodeon job. And so I was called in to be a colorist for Avatar 2, the new TV series that's coming out. So I went to the interview, and they liked what they saw, and I got to meet the creators, and they said, like, this is awesome, you know, why don't you come back again for a second interview? So I go back again for a second interview. I meet all the producers and the art director and directors and so forth. And then after that, I just never heard anything back. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I didn't get this job. You know, it's fine, because that always happens. You know, you might go down to the final interview, and then, like, you know, sometimes nothing will ever come of it, or they don't even, like, let you know what happened. But then I got another call from Nickelodeon saying, like, hey, we want you to come back in for another interview. I'm like, okay, cool. So I went in, and I met these guys, and they were awesome. It was for this Nickelodeon pilot. And as we were talking, I'm like, oh, so I guess you must have seen my portfolio. And they're like, what do you mean portfolio? Like, well, you know, I turned it in here. I was in here last week for the new Avatar TV series. And they're like, oh no, we didn't even hear anything about that. I'm like, well, how did you find my work then? And they were just saying like, oh, well, you know, we found it through your blog. I'm like, what? And this is insane because it's pure luck. They
Well, that's
click
awesome,
on,
actually.
yeah, it's awesome. I mean, that's actually how I got this teaching gig. Like the owner of a CGMW saw my blog and he liked what he saw, and he knew I used to teach at an AI school, and he called me in. But again, it's pure luck, and it was just like if he just didn't click on that one link that led him to another link that led him to my page, I probably wouldn't have gotten that Nickelodeon job. And it just like that's kind of like how I feel like the industry work. It's all luck and timing. And so you always have to keep not only updating your portfolio, but having like a blog too, because you never know who's going to run into it. And I actually do get a lot of freelance work through my blog, which is great because, you know, you can't always be printing out portfolios and sending them to like DreamWorks and DreamWorks and Disney and so forth. So I usually find that a lot of times it's pure luck. As much as there's luck, and then after you have luck, then you need timing because they have to be willing to hire you because you might have the right skill sets, but they might not be hiring at that point.
Right.
But you always have to be persistent. You know, it's when you stop like updating your blog or you stop like sending out your portfolio, that's when it's going to be really difficult to find like any kind of work because you never know who's going to see it too. Like you can send your portfolio to Nickelodeon, and one executive will see it and be like, hey, this looks pretty good. You know, why don't we bring this guy on? And you know, you just never know who's going to see it, and it's a small industry.
Right.
You know, everything gets around.
Well, actually, I have a follow-up question from Ismail that I think lends itself to what you were just talking about. Ismail asked, well, he says, great demo. And the question is, portfolio do's and don'ts. What to include and what to leave out? What are the must-haves in an outstanding portfolio?
Cool. Good question. So usually for a portfolio, this is going to be, again, really difficult because you have to try to nail the person that you want to see your book, and that's impossible. Even right now at Disney, they have a crazy system in the sense of like you can't even do portfolio drops off theirs because I guess there was an incident where, you know, someone went crazy, and so you can't even physically drop off a portfolio there, which is mental. And you have to upload it as a PDF. But then HR has to look at it. And when HR looks at it, they're going to decide what they think is your best work. and then from that filter, they're going to show it to the artist, and depending on if they want to see it or not, or if that's like what they're looking for, it depends if HR actually transferred your images over to them to be viewed, and it becomes even more difficult to get into Disney that way. But the things you always want to keep in there is just your best work, and if there's any work in there that you feel like, oh man, should I put this one in there, or maybe I should take it out, you always just want to make sure it's your best work. And if you second guess anything, just pull it out. And always try to keep updating your portfolio as well. Just keep putting in new work, and just keep making sure that's feeling really up to date. The other thing you always want to make sure is like think about layout. So a lot of times, I'll see people, like let's say this is 11 by 17. I'll see people just turn in like a portfolio just like this. There's just like one character and just kind of idly sitting there. And what you really want to do is with the portfolio, you have to convince a total stranger that not only are you capable of doing the job, but you're really good at being organized as well. And so like if you have like your main character and your main painting like really big, so let's say this was my main painting, then I'm going to include my roughs and my exploration. And, it's just like when I was talking about in the workshop where I would try to experiment with different shapes and different and character attributes. I'm going to include those in the portfolio. And the main idea from this is I want people to see my thought process here and then realize I can make a finished product over here. Because with a lot of times with employers, they want to be able to see that you can give them options. Because if you only have one piece or if you only have like a character, like let's say this was your only character, then they're not going to be able to judge you and be like, well, can he give me different options? Can they give me different shapes, different styles? And what I typically find, if you can make your portfolio page in a way that's going to be able to communicate to a total stranger that you have a thought process and you have a technique of getting to your final destination, then they're going to be more willing to pretty much hire you. Because right now I'm at a really big disadvantage because I didn't finish school. Well, that's pretty much the biggest one, because like if they see that, they're going to be like, oh, well, why didn't you finish school? And sometimes with HR it's really difficult to get through them, or actually, yeah, get past them and get to your work seen by the artist. So another good technique is in your front of your book should always be your best work, and then all the way towards the end, then that's when you're going to put in your resume if you don't have like a lot of work experience, because you want them to see the work and be like, oh yeah, this is really cool, yeah. And then when they finally get to your resume, then they're going to be like, oh, you didn't have too much work, but we should still show the artist his book anyways.
Okay. And actually, what would be good is if you have some examples you can show, that would be great, Erik.
Yeah, let me pull that out right now, actually.
Let's see here.
I think, unfortunately, my main computer decided to explode on me, so...
No problem.
So I'm going to see... Should have one updated, though.
Let's see here. And while you pull those up, anybody else in attendance, feel free to ask any more questions. Okay.
Okay. So this is, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is just one of my portfolios. And to be honest, I don't know how long or when this was updated, but hopefully this is fairly updated. But you can see here, I'm trying to give them several options of my painting style. So if I have to be a little bit more realistic, I can. But if they need me to be really graphic, I can still give them this option. And I usually find, and this will differ from artist to artist. Some artists will say you should only do your voice. Think of like Peter DeSev or Carter Goodrich. Those guys pretty much only draw in their own style, which is awesome. But I usually find that to be a lot more difficult to get jobs. And the only reason being is because they're just going to assume that all you can do is paint in your own style. So I consider myself more as a designer, so that means I can wear multiple hats. So if you need me to draw something really graphic, I can do it. If you need something a little bit more realistic, I can paint that as well. And there's no real set style, pretty much. I'm trying to show as much range as I can, because you never know what the project they're working on is going to be. And because of that, it becomes really difficult. So usually a good rule of thumb is try to give them enough examples, and then like have them, and then hopefully you'll hit something.
Right.
So you can see here I have all these different character sketches and different explorations to let them kind of choose from. And then from here I have my final page. So this is like, I think I made this for like 11 by 17. But they can see here how like clean I can get with my shapes and with my colors. But then, here they can see like the really rough, loose sketches, and they can see how I kind of got to that final rendering. Yeah, this is actually really this is from my old portfolio, and but here I'm giving them like a key scene, but then I'm also showing like production value stuff, because as much as we love doing all these kind of digital paintings, we also need to show them kind of like how we can be useful for production. So when you give this to a 3D modeler, they could actually come in here and start building building the sets. So if you can show that not only can you do characters, but you can do sets and set design, you're going to become much more profitable and also easier to help around production. And also just having like a really nice, clean presentation is the most important part, because it's kind of like if you go to a job interview and you're wearing clothes that like have food stain on it, you're wearing flip-flops, your portfolio is going to feel like the exact same thing as you, and this has to represent you as best as it can. So you always want to make sure it's clean, it's legible, and it's easy to read. And if you could do that, then it's going to be a lot more easier. And having pieces like this will also help them know that even though I can do characters, if I have to go and do props or set designs, I can give them that option too. Because a lot of times, especially if you're working for a smaller studio, you're going to be wearing multiple hats. Like when I was at Jim Henson, I was their lead character designer, but at the same time I was also their lead story artist. So I was doing storyboards, I was doing characters, and then occasionally I would have to do set designs. And a lot of times you're going to find that happen where they're going to ask you to do multiple jobs and wear multiple hats. And for me, that's always the funnest kind of job, because from there, you're going to acquire like a lot more skill sets, and it's really fun too. So you can see here I have my my value study here, and I have my line drawing, and then here's a quick comp that I did without like any without the characters. So when I show this to an employer, they're going to be able to see a thought process here, and then the final execution of the painting. And I think that's really important for them, because they want to know who they're hiring. And this is again like another a set design, where I had to go in and I had to design like these tables here, and I had to figure out like how are these cups going to be on here, how the cookies going to be on here. But then I had to go ahead and also illustrate this barn and try to figure out like where all these placements were going to be. And you can see here the level of detail is really kind of realistic, because that's what the show needed to be. And I couldn't come in and be like and show them let's see. So they would look at this and be like, well, I don't know if you can do those really tight line drawings. But when they see something like this, then they're going to be like, well, okay, so he can do a tight line drawing. And I used to do an independent study with Marcelo Vignali, and he told me this really great story how on at Disney he was trying to get ready to roll into the next Disney feature, which at the time was Brother Bear. And they were looking at his portfolio, and they're like, oh, well, we're not sure we can really roll you onto that production. And he's like, why not? And they said like, well, we just don't think you could draw bears. And he's like, really? Well, give me a weekend and I'll bring you some sketches. And they're like, okay. So he goes home, he makes the most awesomest bear drawings ever, and he shows it to them like, wow, you could really draw bears. Okay, yeah, we'll roll you onto this next production. But, it's insane when you think about it. A person like Marcelo, who's been in the industry forever, and he's, top of the line, and yet even he has to keep proving to strangers that he could draw and he can design and do everything awesome. So this industry is all about you're constantly having to prove yourself,
Actually,
even
then
when you're already established.
I want to say actually another question that I think will be a good follow-up to that is, well, what is the most challenging aspect of being a concept artist, basically?
Hmm. Wait, what was the question again?
What is the most challenging aspect of being a concept artist?
Good question. Um, yeah,
Because basically
I
you
don't
just were
quite know how to.
speaking in regards to how, an established, well-known artist still has to, in a way, prove himself in spite of having all this work beforehand, in regards to a particular project or production. So if your portfolio didn't have, let's say, examples of what exactly needs to be seen in that particular show, for example, then, unless you're given the opportunity to show that, then it could be a disadvantage for you not having a range of things, to show.
Yeah, yeah.
But in your case specifically, I would say then, for this particular question, what things, are challenging, for a concept artist in general?
Well, that's the hardest part because the biggest problem is like you just never know who's going to look at your portfolio, and depending, sometimes they just want to see something that really caters to the production. So let's say, for example, you're working on they want to do something medieval. I actually don't have anything medieval in my portfolio, and unless you can find out from someone or a friend like that's what the current production is, then it's going to be really difficult to jump on there, assuming the person who's reviewing your portfolio actually knows what they're doing. And there's been plenty of times in other studios where like HR really have no idea what they're doing, and it's really sad because you'll see a lot of great talent kind of get like shuffled off, and then someone else will get it that, you know, well, it's not a bad thing, but it's like they're not really hiring the best talent because they don't recognize it. Like even at another production I was on, we had this really terrible director who would only come in for 2 or 3 hours in a day, and the guy clearly didn't know what he was doing. And the problem with that is like production never goes anywhere in that case. And it was for a pretty high-profile studio where you would think something like that wouldn't happen, but the problem is stuff like that happens all the time. So we were all brought on, and then all of a sudden he came along, and unfortunately the production never went anywhere.
Wow.
It was a great opportunity because we got to run the show, but
Yeah.
unfortunately a lot of projects are killed that way.
That's unfortunate, actually. Um,
Yeah, it actually, a lot of times you're going to be in a situation where you're like, how'd you get this job again? And, live action is even worse because a lot of times the director will always hire their their wife, or it'll be some kind of weird situation where a friend will hire another friend, and things can get really really messy really fast. But usually from the art side, we're just here to do our job, and that's kind of like how you always have to view it. They brought us on to do our task, and as long as you take care of your task, then that's really all you can ask for, because a lot of times you really have no control. If
right.
they come in and they say like, okay, so we want to do a children's movie, it's going to be about genocide, and you're like, wait, what? And you know, you always have to give them options and say like, well, I don't think you should do this. I think maybe this would be better. But sometimes you'll find that it's just impossible, and unfortunately, you have to roll with the punches.
Right.
Um, for this image, I'm just going to say real quickly, this is again just for production's sake. So when you give this to a 3D modeler, they're going to know where to place the objects, and then also how to build it, and different materials to build the set. And I usually find those are really more important than actually doing like really finished paintings like these, because this is, at the end of the day, this is what's going to have to be built, and this is really crucial for production. And a lot of times you'll find people like they'll kind of struggle with this at first because it requires a really mechanical a thought process. Versus, like these kind of paintings, I'm not expecting I don't have to hand this to anyone to have them build it. So like even here, I could be really loose and just try to capture a feeling with a sense of color and lighting.
And what's
But
the time frame for you to complete the particular styles of illustration, like the fully rendered versus the actual schematic sketches you do for production?
it's really weird. They'll give you a little more time for paintings, but like for this one, I had an afternoon. So this was as quickly as I can because we were dealing with a team out in India, and again, outsourcing is like the kiss of death because like I'll send them this image, and usually they're unfortunately work like crazy, and they'll send it back to me, and I'll do corrections on top of their 3D model. But sometimes I could send this out, and they won't work on it, or somehow gets lost in the mail, and it just slows down production because unfortunately, you always get like, so this is your start, and here's your finish. It never changes. Even if they want to add more elements and more stuff, your finish will always stay the same. And it's always difficult because, even for this scene, I had to do a scene where I drew like all these presents. So it was literally like 1,000 boxes, and I had to make sure they were all like going in the right perspective, and I had to make sure they were all different proportions. I really wish I had that one here to show you guys, but it was a really crazy scene because I think I did like 400 boxes, all in perspective, all in this stupid room, and it was a really dumb scene. And I fought so hard to be like, no, we don't need to do this. This is insane. But unfortunately for India, they needed that kind of information to be like so accurate because they're so afraid to do to take any risk on their own. So it's up to you as a concept artist to make sure all your drawings communicate so well that they can build it. Because you can see here, just by looking at this table, they could be like, okay, count this many, count that many, and you make it. But we were so paranoid about them, so we had to come over here, and I had to do a top view. This is another like 10, 15 minutes wasted, in a sense, like they could just look at this and build it. But unfortunately, that's what you have to do when you're dealing with overseas. You have to give them as much information as you can, and it really slows down the production. So the finish line never changes, and they don't give you extra time. So you have to really kind of figure out like how quickly you can get these out. So in this one, I like had an afternoon because they needed it right then and there to start the animation sequence. Like this one, I had maybe 2 or 3 days. But it's funny because like a really loose painting like this, I can get maybe 4 days or 3 days, but it really depends on production and how badly they really need it. Because a lot of times, they'll be like, okay, we need to finish this many so we can show our investors so they're happy, or we need to finish this many scenes, that way we can still be on time. Because at the end of the day, like this never changes. And they could be like, well, we want to add more elements, we want to change the lighting, but unfortunately you just have to adapt to that. And it becomes really scary at times because you never know if what you're doing is really worthwhile, and it's usually up to the production manager to make sure everything's running smoothly. And thankfully, when I was at Technicolor, we had a really good production manager who also knew how to fight for the artist and be like, no, we're not wasting our time with this. This is ridiculous. And I've been on productions where they'll just like kind of roll over, and unfortunately, it's the artists who always get hurt the most because you have to do these designs where it's just like, really? You need me to design a snowball? That's insane, sir. It happens.
Right.
And it was funny, David Coleman was our art director on that project. And if you know who David Coleman is, he's like this really amazing like animal character designer. And we were dealing with Mattel at the time, and he was they were basically telling him like, no, that doesn't look like a dog. Or like he was designing this husky dog, and one of the producers there kept saying like, no, that's not a dog. That's not a husky dog. And it was crazy at the time because I'm like, well, why are you telling this man how to do this? He's obviously knows what he's doing about animal sketches. And then we had this amazing Disney layout artist, and they were giving him perspective notes on it. And this guy's been working on just about every single Disney feature you can imagine. He was the lead layout artist on a Frog Princess. And it's just like, it's crazy, but, unfortunately you just have to roll with the punches, and, just have to manage with that.
Right.
But just for this image, again, I'm showing all my rough sketches that eventually lead to a finished painting. And, just to go back to that portfolio question, this is going to be able to show them like, oh, you can give me multiple designs and you can also give me a finished painting. And that's kind of like what you always want to go for.
That makes
and again,
sense.
like you can see how very little these sketches changed, but at the same time they want to be able to have different options. And then showing like a just tree trunk in different angles, or just rotating it around, just so like when you give it to 3D modelers, they can actually build it. And this is another one where, I had to do like all these quick little thumbnail designs to give it to them and be like, so is this what you want? Is this what you want? And then I give them 2 different painting options to choose from. And a lot of times this happens. This was for a pilot TV show, and it was really cool. It was super graphic, but you can see how you always have to go through all these iterations. And for TV animation, the pipeline's much shorter, and it's a lot more stressful, because at least with feature animation you have usually enough time to really design things and get things approved and the ball rolling. But for TV production, it's like they want everything so quickly that it's a lot of work. And I have several friends that work at Titmouse Animation, and they're working crazy long hours. Some of them spend the night at the studio just to finish like like a Metalocalypse episode, or I'm trying to think what other shows they did. They work on a lot of pilots though.
Right.
But yeah.
So you prefer feature animation over episodic broadcast stuff?
The advantage to TV animation is your work gets out there really quickly, and things get approved really quickly because they realize they don't have like a production. They really don't have the time or budget to really like take forever. The problem with feature animation at any studio is they could spend a long time really just having reviews and meetings. Like I had a friend that worked on Rapunzel, and they had a meeting on if they should show Flint Rider's nipple. It's just like, wouldn't it be more weird if he didn't have a nipple? And it's like, what's going on here? Why would you even bother having a meeting about this? But at Disney, even on the Disney interactive side, we had so many crazy meetings. It's like, at the time of my first project, we were working on an MMO, and they were like, so should we have like the player walk in the water? Are they going to drown? And I'm like, this is a video game. This is insane. But, a lot of times you'll, I don't know which one's better, actually. Because they both have their pros and cons. Because even for a feature animation, at any given point they can pull a plug. Because as soon as they say yes, that's when a producer's problem starts. And if they say no to everything, then they're kind of saved, and they only lose like a couple $100,000 to make either the pilot or the pitch or whatever needs to be done.
Right. Okay.
This was for like this one. This was for a Tofu Girl short animation, and I think we had this one was cool because the guy really wanted to spend as much time as he wanted, and it was mostly just for a Comic-Con kind of short. So I think we had like a couple of months, but even then this was really rushed. But you can see like even on TV production, you have to be pretty loose about everything, or really graphic. That way you can maintain that style all the way through. And that's the other hard thing about TV animation, especially when you're working in background, is you have to make sure everything looks like it came from one guy. And but it's really fun though, because you really can do different styles and different different kind of marks, because at least with TV animation you can really push the style a lot more than in feature animation, because you have a lot more executives a lot more money involved in feature animation. So like, well, I don't think we should make it this graphic because the people in the Midwest are going to be confused by it, or I don't think this is a really good style, we can't market it. And you usually find that that in TV animation, it tends to be a lot more expressive. Like a show like Samurai Jack would take forever to get approved in a feature animation budget, because at the end of the day, they're saying like, well, can we make money from this? And the margins are just too high to do like a $60 million film on something that's like, well, I guess we could get some money off of it. But for a TV animation, like, it's a lot more flexible in terms of style, which is awesome.
Right. Okay, our next
this,
question. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go for it.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask a question from Ismail. What tips/exercises would you recommend to get better at coming up with interesting compositions?
There's a lot of times it's really worthwhile to actually just go ahead and just like sketch in your neighborhood or sketch like any kind of like locations, and then try to think of ways that you would try and make the composition better. So even if you see like a food court, this is going to be super loose. Let's say you're just eating lunch, and because the problem is a lot of times we'll always just go to the same place to eat lunch, but what I usually typically find that helps a lot is like even if I'm sitting at a diner or something that I'm usually familiar with, I'll try to think of ways I can make it improve it. So I'll be like, all right, so maybe I need a foreground element, maybe like a tree or some sort, and then be like, okay, so maybe here I'm going to need to put a mountain so I can start thinking about having it flow to my focal point. And usually I find like this helps a lot because a lot of times you can start to really use your imagination on locations that you've been to and make it a lot more interesting. Another thing you can do is you can literally just start making weird marks. And from here, this is where you're going to get a lot of happy accidents. But the thing that works best about this is you're not really thinking too much about it. You're just trying to capture a movement and a feeling. And a lot of times when you're doing production, it's really easy to get really stiff because you're just worrying like, oh, am I making this right? Is this working? And you can see here I'm just lowering the opacity, and then from there I'm going to start to really try to figure out what exactly these marks were being made. Because a lot of times, it's a lot easier to make something feel stiff and rigid versus really organic and fun. So this is just a usual exercise I'll do, and you can see here I'm just being really quick about this. I'm not really trying to make a finished piece. And a lot of times it's just to get an idea across. And then I'll turn off that layer. Oops, gotta get this guy. And it's just an idea to start to figure out like a rough environment. And you can see here I'm kind of feeling more like a Western kind of scene, or maybe these are like some kind of crazy looking mountains. But even just doing little sketches like these are just really good practice because you're just looking for the big shapes, and that's really the most important part because you can start adding detail everywhere and it won't really matter if the big shapes aren't working. So even with this thing, I wasn't thinking about it at all, but I have my big, my medium, and my small, and usually with those kind of elements you always want to rearrange them so they become like really visually interesting, and it's going to really help your environments like stand out. And then like here I'm thinking about a foreground element, maybe like a foreground bush or something. But I always find like this is just a really good practice. And another really great thing to do, let me see if I can pull this out, is you can't get any better than really studying the masters and trying to figure out like why does their paintings work so well. So this one's from shoot, I don't know why I'm blanking out. Eggard Payne. So this is an Eggard Payne painting, and he's a really beautiful like landscape painter. And if you ever get a chance, you should always study as many landscape painters as you can, because they have such gorgeous color combinations going on. And even how do you make like a really a scene from nature look really visually interesting? Because like a lot of times this tree, it'll probably be like right here, or like these trees will be like maybe covering up more of this mountain, but he edited what he was seeing to make it look visually more interesting. And and it's kind of similar to when the first example I was giving you, where you start to envision like your town or the place where you usually eat, and you're trying to make things much more interesting. So like adding that foreground tree, or maybe adding a car here to make something feel like just more interesting. But I would always recommend studying classical painters, because they always spend so much time refining their paintings and making things work so well. And it's also just really good to study as many artists as you can that you like, especially if you admire them, and try to figure out like why do they make their marks, but more importantly, what did they leave out? How come he didn't put a tree right here? Why did he leave like this negative space? And then you start to figure out like, well, okay, so he wanted to keep this area to breathe a little bit more, but then he also made sure this line was a little bit darker so it would lead your eye down this like a river path. So these are the kind of things like I always recommend people to study, and just really try to find anything visually interesting about these about paintings. And then you can see how even studying this, oops, let me see if I can get this image over. You can even see how it's applying to like really classic animation. So this is from a Wile E. Coyote episode from Warner Brothers, and you can see here how the background is just completely silhouette, but we still see it as really far away. But these mountains here, they're much warmer, so they're coming much closer to us. Because anything that's warm usually feels like it's coming closer to us, and anything that's cool is feeling really pushed back, because here you have atmospheric perspective. And if you look back at this painting, you can see how these mountains are feeling much more bluer than these guys. Like these guys feel much warmer than this. So this is the kind of stuff that you really have to do if you really want to become a better environment painter, and just a better artist in general. These are the kind of things like you want to study really classical paintings, but then also more contemporary like animation paintings. So you can figure out like why did the artist chose to do this, and and like what was the point.
Awesome. Our next question is, how do you determine the color palette you use to create your characters?
A lot of that will really depend on the character that I'm trying to communicate. So the one that was with the pirate, those colors kind of came from, I really want him to be really warm and sunburned, because he's been completely out in the element. And but a lot of times it's going to depend on like the character you want to showcase. For example, this one from Dean Cornwell, you can see this guy was like one of those people that would be like, I forgot what they're called, but they're fighting like the bull, and they're
A matador?
Yeah. So you can see on his color scheme, like he made him a little bit more darker and richer. Versus her, the idea was to make this woman feel much more fragile, less, I guess, aggressive, if that's the right word. But so you can see how he made her very pale, very, very almost easy to take advantage of. But on this guy, he made it much more darker and richer. And this is kind of like the same way I treat my color key, or my color for my characters, because I'm going to try to think about like what I really want to communicate with them. Let me see if I can pull out my portfolio. So in this case, for when I was choosing a color key, I was thinking that my light source was coming down here, and it's going to be a very warm light. So I had to make sure she also reflected that, so it felt like it was from the same world. And that's usually how I'm always trying to figure out like how to arrange my colors so they work in that way, so it doesn't feel like it's really far off. And then once I figure that out, then I can harmonize my painting to make sure it's either going to pop the character out or feel like the character's like kind of going more backlit. Because if I didn't make her feel as red there, and I made the background also red, she wouldn't be popping out as much. But since her hair is red and her facial colors are very warm, and I made the background much cooler, she's going to pop out even more. And even with the imaginary monster, he's a much cooler color because I didn't want this guy to compete with her. And so I had to start thinking about a really hierarchy system. You know, she is our focal point. I want the viewer to look at her first before they realize, you know, this guy doesn't even have a reflection. So whenever you're designing your colors for your characters, you know, you always want to think in that respect. You know, if you're going to do like an elf or something, you're usually going to want to, and let's say the elf resides in the forest, you're always going to want to make sure they feel like very earth tone colors, but also in a very green palette. Because if you start making it really bright palette or like a very warm desert kind of colors, it's just going to feel very strange, and they're not going to like really fit in with their environment. So you always have to think about the character's personality and what kind of color choices would fit that character really well. Let me see if I have. So in this case, you know, this was like a kid character, and for this color palette, you know, I wanted him to feel really youthful and really vibrant. So I made sure the colors felt very warm, and also his clothing color was also going to be more of an earth tone kind of color. And you know, that's usually a color of like feeling really youthful without, you know, going with the really garish kind of like neon colors. But if I go back to this one, you know, I want this guy to feel threatening, and I want him to feel, you know, almost sickly. So for him, I really made sure like his skin color was feeling really green, and it was also going to reflect in his environment, because this guy is actually a ghost. But you know, as a viewer, we don't know that, and I just want to make something very odd about him. So you're like, well, he seems normal. He seems like he has regular Earth colors, but there's just something very off about him. And that's kind of like what I did for this color piece. So when you look at his color scheme, it really reflects his environment and where he's coming from. Versus this guy, who is very warm color, you know, you can see him wearing like a Hawaiian t-shirt. He's going to contrast his whole environment. Like, this guy does not belong in this environment. And that was my whole thought process on creating this image. And usually that's how you're going to have to really think about your palette for your characters. Because it's not just going to be on a blank white piece of paper. You know, your characters are usually going to be living in some kind of world, and you want to make sure that they're going to really reflect in that world, and they're either going to complement it or they're going to contrast it. So, and you always want to do that to help really maintain your storyline with that character, and if it's going to work. Cool. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, and I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Cool.
The next one is, what is the most exciting project you've worked on and why?
I want to see if I have the work here, because I really hope this portfolio has it. Because the most exciting one was definitely Nickelodeon, because that project was really catering to my style, and it was just really fun to work on. All right, so this was the Nickelodeon pilot that I worked on, and unfortunately I can't tell you anything about it. I can't even tell you the name under the NDA contracts that we signed, and that's actually the most cruelest thing about being a concept illustrator is sometimes you work on these amazing projects and you can't tell anyone about it, and you can't show anyone any of the work on it, because, you know, with fear of it getting leaked on the internet, and you know, then you'll be in really big trouble. So right. Always make sure that you get, like, I got permission to put these on my blog, but under the guideline that I don't tell anyone what the project is about, and that's pretty much it. So this was a really awesome 2D animation. I mean,
it looks really
I could probably
cool.
just tell you.
No, don't risk anything. It's fine.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, you know, it was medieval, obviously, and there was orcs, and there was like wizards and unicorns, and it was just hilariously funny, because the creators were these two storyboard artists. One was from Pixar, and this other guy was from Disney. And when I was watching the animatic, I was just laughing so much because I'm like, this is amazing. This is going to be the coolest show on Nickelodeon. And
Okay.
so we were creating all these backgrounds for it, and it was going to be sent. And when I saw the boards, I'm like, oh my God, there's no way anyone's going to be able to animate this because these guys come from a feature background, and to storyboard feature quality is really difficult. It's really expensive. It's time consuming, and there was like there was a Pegasus in the show, so you needed a person to animate a horse, but also animate wings. And I was just like, there's no way they're going to be able to do this. But then we got the pilot back, and it looked amazing. Like this small Korean studio really put their heart and soul into it. And I think it was just because they realized they were working on a really awesome, funny project.
Right.
And we were all so excited about it. And I'm like, Nickelodeon, of course they're going to pick this up. They'll be retarded not to pass it up. But unfortunately, they did. And we were all shocked by it, and we were all very sad by it because there was just so.
Hello, Eric? Okay, well, it appears that we may have lost Eric's mic, but we've reached the 1 hour mark anyway, so I guess it's not so good, but great timing. Beyond that, I'll basically end the live Q&A for now. For those of you in attendance, please make sure to check out the other workshops that we have online, and also the master classes for those of you who are interested. They're available as well. But that's it for now. Eric, if you can hear me, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all your amazing work. And we really appreciate the workshop. And to everybody in attendance, thank you so much for just for participating. Again, thank you, and this concludes our Q&A for today. Bye for now.